Where can you find gourmet organic coffees, a friendly hometown atmosphere, and beautiful views of Humboldt Bay and beyond? It's Has Beans Cafe, open every day at 2nd and I Street in the heart of Old Town Eureka. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for tuning in. This is Charles Douglas of the Humboldt Sentinel here at the Access Humboldt Media Center in Eureka. This is episode 15 of Sentinel Interviews. We were supposed to be speaking this week with Eureka Police Chief Gar Nielsen. That's going to be on our next episode. So our last-minute substitute guest who was kind enough to come in, Nicholas Bravo, the one, the only, the infamous, an independent television producer who has his own program here on Access Humboldt Channel 12, namely The Nick Bravo Show. He came down to Has Beans Cafe to discuss his philosophy on life, what motivates him to produce independent media, and how he's trying to take on the local political establishment, the media, and, pretty much everybody who's in charge. Remember, you can find Sentinel Interviews here on Channel 12 every Thursday at 7 p.m., Sunday at 3:30 p.m., and Wednesday at 5:30 p.m., and also on YouTube. That's youtube.com/Humboldt Sentinel. Nicholas Bravo,
yes.
Welcome to Has Beans Cafe.
Thank you.
So we had a last-minute cancellation. The Chief of Police of Eureka was due to come in here. We're going to have him on our next show. So you were gracious enough to come in, and actually we're beginning a series where we're talking to local media makers. Actually, we've already spoken to the editors of Savage Henry magazine for the finale of our first season.
Yes.
We're also speaking to a local independent media producer such as yourself. Obviously, it's fair to say you're probably the most controversial television producer on the air right now in Humboldt County.
Yes, I am. And part of why I am controversial is because I'm a libertarian. I am also an avid fan of Ayn Rand, if you've read her books, Atlas Shrugged and The Virtue of Selfishness. I am doing a series on Virtue of Selfishness on Access Humboldt. Some of the episodes I already have up. I do definitely intend to become more and more controversial with just a few of the episodes that I've had on Access Humboldt, such as Peter Martin versus the Arcade of Lie. I have actually received death threats because of that. I've also received harassment via phone because of that. So there are quite a few power players in Humboldt County who have taken lessons from the globalists in regards to how to control an issue, dominate a people, and basically keep people ignorant for their own fiendish purposes.
Well, I can say that I've received a few phone calls, people looking for you, calling the Humboldt Sentinel. So just to clarify, for the universe that's tuning in, you are producing your own shows.
I am producing my own shows.
And the Humboldt Sentinel is not responsible for your shows.
I am responsible. I am solely responsible for my own shows. I like creating the controversy because it gets people to think. Because far too often, I mean, here in Humboldt, we live in a very, very politically correct culture. Like I mentioned Obama a couple of times to people locally. And as soon as I say something critical of Obama, one of the first things I hear is, "Oh, you're a racist." It's like, no, when I focus on people, I'm focusing on their character. I'm focusing on the quality of their thought, the quality of their action. I'm focusing on those virtues. And I will be doing, again, more episodes and shows on virtues and vices and the philosophy of Ayn Rand. Now, while Ayn Rand was not necessarily, she wouldn't have called herself a libertarian, she definitely saw her primary axiom is that the individual is their highest value. You as the individual are your highest value. It doesn't mean you go around hurting other people for your own benefit, but it definitely means that you don't allow others to take advantage of you just because they choose to do so.
Well, in some ways, though, isn't that kind of not crossing the line, but perhaps edging up on the line between libertarianism and anarchism? There's a famous book on the subject, The Anarchic Harmony, the Spirituality of Social Disobedience, that talks about systems where we invoke our own individual heroic nature, but we also pursue voluntary systems of non-coercive cooperation between those individuals.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's another really important aspect to touch on. There is a YouTuber, philosopher, he's Canadian, by the name of Stefan Molyneux, freedomainradio.com. He's written a couple of books on the subject as far as, I believe one of his books is called Universal Behavior. And what it is basically, his main axiom is that non-initiation of force. The minute that you think that you have the right to physically force or force in any way somebody else to do something, you're basically violating a universal principle. Unfortunately, we have in our society, because of government, and you'll see this as far as the elites, they believe in a system of might makes right, nature being read in tooth and claw. If you can physically force somebody to do something, it's perfectly ethical. Whereas at the same time, the elites teach the peasants, which we are all peasants, we are all slaves in their system. We just think we're free. We're like free-range livestock. We're the chickens running from one end of the pen to the other, shouting, "We're free, we're free!" And it's like, no, we're not free at all. If you're free, try not paying taxes. If you're free, try not paying car insurance and drive. If you're free, try going to another country without a passport, see what happens. And now, as far as the universal principle, working with people is a very good thing to do. I mean, it's how the masses survive. The problem is, we're taught that we as peasants and slaves are supposed to just altruistically allow whatever stronger force comes across us to dominate and control.
Now, of course, that's not to be confused with pacifism, where you would allow someone to murder you and your family if attacked. You're talking about non-aggression, where no initiation of force is undertaken, but if you are attacked, you may defend yourself.
Correct. I'm definitely not a pacifist. I am far from a pacifist. I recently bought a taser because I had a death threat. And, if somebody were to come at me, say, for example, or Verbena, known as Kim Starr, both are very, but both do definitely have problems with me. And if they came at me, or any other so-called activist, or anybody came at me with the intention of doing me harm, I would more than gladly, I have an obligation to myself. I am my own highest value. I would happily turn that taser on. I might give them a warning, say, hey, back off. And then I'd zap them a couple of times, make sure they understood the message of, hey, you don't get to physically violate my person. That's reality. One of the things that I'd like to speak about is the local activism here in Eureka and Arcata and Humboldt County in general. What we have, unfortunately, and I don't mean to be too hard on most people, unfortunately, this needs to be said. We have a lack of commitment to reality. We have a lack of commitment to the real issues going on. We have problems with housing, a lack of housing. We have problems with unemployment. We have problems with police corruption, government corruption, those kinds of things. And most of the activists here are so busy worrying about corporations that will never be in Humboldt, that will have no effect on their lives in regards to their lives here in Humboldt. So that to the point it is that big issues, serious local issues, are basically swept under the rug. You have people, for example, like Verbena, also known as Kim Starr, I believe it was. She continually brings up things like Richardson Grove, when in fact that issue is pretty much a dead issue. It really does not matter in the scheme of things. Now, I know some people might sit there and say, well, it matters because of old growth redwood and blah, blah, blah. Let's face it, a tree is replaceable. a human being is not. Now, when I was at the Humboldt supervisors meeting that occurred a couple of Tuesdays ago, there were a lot of people from Richardson Grove. And one of the things I had said in my commentary was that, I will gladly chop down an old growth redwood tree if it means giving some homeless family a home. I'll cut down 4 of them if I have to give some homeless family a home. Of course, one of the Redwood Grove environmentalist wackos screamed, "Over my dead body." Now, this shows a lack of compassion for people. This shows that in reality, a lot of these environmentalists up here do not actually care about human beings in any way, shape, or form. And also, as we can see with what people like Al Gore is doing with the environment as far as with the oil and with the nuclear radiation, all these serious issues that are affecting people on a global level, we have people like Al Gore saying to us, cut down on your consumption, live like a bunch of Luddites or Mennonites or whatever, just barely scraping by off the land, a difficult life like the peasants of the Middle Ages, where they didn't know if they were going to be alive next week because they might die of starvation or of some easily preventable disease. Meanwhile, the elites, of course, get to fly around in jets powered by all the oil they can muster, and to them, there's this psychological disconnect. We have one group of people saying, the problem is, when I'm talking about a lot of this stuff, there are so many issues that fit in with each other. It's like a giant spider web. So the way my mind works is I'm looking at all these issues. I'm looking at all these issues, the big, huge, gigantic picture. And I'm seeing that fat little spider called the elitists, called the global elitists, called the banksters, called, Sarkozy and Rockefellers and Queen Beatrix, all these people who are multi-billionaires. They're right there in the middle of the web, sucking off all the flies. Now, of course, they fool people with their spokesmen, such as Bush or Obama. And I'm looking at this giant web, and I see all these wannabe activists, all these people who claim to be activists, who, focus on some irrelevant issue. And of course, when they actually do get attached to a major issue, all the elites have to do is go, "Arr!" and they back off real quickly. I mean, I myself, with my show on Access Humboldt Channel 12, I have had death threats. I have had people threaten my life. I have had people threaten me with physical harm. And this is because I expose real issues. People don't like that. There is a very real sense of corruption here up in Humboldt County. Because what happens is you see the psychological, spiritually defective, diseased, morally corrupt, who are at the center of the web, the elites. They're doing all their immoral, unethical stuff that they do, and then you have all these morally corrupt people at the bottom who are local people, such as, and I hate to name names, but I'm going to have to, people like Kevin Hoover, people like, who else am I thinking of? Hank Sims, Terrence McNally. There's all these people in government who basically all they do is they watch what the elites do and they go, oh, okay, how can we feed off other people too, just like the elites are doing? So eventually you just have this, it's this buffet of these parasitic, ethically debased creatures just feeding off each other. And I myself, I am a true activist. I stand up and I say, wait a minute, each individual has a sovereign right unto themselves. They are their own authority. They have the right to have control of their lives. They have a right to self-govern. Now, that doesn't mean they get to do whatever they want, but it sure as hell does mean that they have a right to live their life without interference by some government or some politician or some corporation or some regulation. A lot of it is about the keeping you as an individual from competing. And Rockefeller himself said competition is a sin. And if they can keep you down on the farm, so to speak, poor, scraping for crumbs, that means you're not going to be in competition with them, and they can take hold of whatever they desire to have, whether it's money or gold or oil or food. And then what happens is you basically live a life of misery where you're constantly giving, you're being told you have to give back. And I heard one so-called activist, I won't say who it was, they said, why don't the homeless give back to society? If you're living in your car or living on your street and you can't afford food, and if you're some family living in your car, trying to take care of your children, how do you give back? You don't have anything to give back, and also that's a false premise. Because giving back, what have you been given that you need to give back? And if you've gotten something that you haven't earned, well, you're also looking at the same methodology by which the elites behave. They take from you in taxes, in time, in resources, as far as your life. They basically teach you a religion of self-sacrifice. They teach you a morality of self-sacrifice, of just giving and giving and giving, while at the same time, they follow a completely different code. And it's not a code of selfishness. It's not a code of, you get to value yourself. No, it's a code in their minds of they have a right to feed on you. They have a right to take advantage of you. They have a right to take your life, because in their minds, your life is theirs to take. Your time is theirs to take. Your flesh is theirs to feed on. And that is not true selfishness in the sense that Ayn Rand meant it when she talks about it in her book, The Virtue of Selfishness, which I am also doing a series on Access Humboldt Channel 12 in regards to that book. And I hope you do catch all the episodes of that, because I think that a more libertarian viewpoint is definitely what's needed here in Humboldt. We have way too many people attached to socialism, attached to communism, attached to dead political systems. Even democracy, as we think of it, is truly a political system of the dead, because it's saying, if 51% decide that the other 49 have to die, well then, by golly, according to democracy, that's the way it should be. And the Founding Fathers, when they created this country, they had no intention of creating a democracy. They wanted to create a republic. We have allowed ourselves to become so distracted by the elites, by the media, by corporate creations of that giant, pus-filled spider that is the elites. They have been able to distract us. So while we're all worried about things like Richardson Grove or Justin Bieber or some other godforsaken idiotic little thing we can see on YouTube, the world is burning around us. We're not paying attention. We're not stocking up on food or silver or water or gold or anything that really matters. We're not even creating healthy relationships with each other, because what we're doing is we're trying to follow the societal methodology that the elites have set up for us, which is, just trust your government, trust the banks, just do whatever the heck you want to do, and it doesn't matter who you hurt. This, of course, is spiritually and ethically corrupt. It's also psychologically disturbed, because when you create any kind of community, any kind of society, and when I say society, I don't mean the amorphous blob that most people, when they speak about society, mean. Because society is just nothing but an aggregate of individuals. You can have a society of 5 people, you can have a society of 5,000. Now, whether or not those people intermix with certain ideas or not, I, for example, I share a number of ideas with certain groups, but I also share other ideas with other groups. And those two groups, those two aggregates of individuals, don't necessarily get along. But at the same time, again, I'm looking at things through a wider screen. I can sit down, I can go, okay, the left paradigm and the right paradigm, they're just two figureheads for the same banksters, for the same globalist elites. And I think we as individuals need to become a lot more educated in regards to who's really in charge. You think Obama's in charge? Obama's not in charge. No more than Ronald McDonald is in charge of McDonald's, or the stupid little Geico lizard is in charge of Geico Insurance. Those are just figureheads. Now also I want to point out with the hypocrisy of the left-right paradigm. You know, we had Bush, and when we had Bush in office, there were so many people in Humboldt, in Arcata, in Eureka, screaming, Bush is a war criminal, he needs to be brought to justice, etc. But now we have Obama, who is basically following the same lesson plan as George Bush, who is starting illegal, unethical wars. He's launching Tomahawk missiles at the cost of $500,000 each into Libya, killing civilians. And what do the activists locally here do? They don't care. What do the activists in the country do? They don't really care. You know, because it's this hypocrisy. It's, oh, Obama's our first black president. He can do it because, you know, if we say anything bad about him, we're racist, which is absolute bull. If it was Bush doing it, we'd be screaming, you know, for him to, you know, go to trial for war crimes. You know, yet we give Obama a peace prize before he's even done anything, and then all he does is continue these wars and then start new ones, which of course is about oil. And so what's that going to do? That's going to give more profits to the banksters. Now what's really funny about the Federal Reserve is they're actually creating money out of nothing. They're operating on the faith that you have in the government. They're operating on the faith that you have in the American dollar, whatever that means. But if you look at the amount of stuff, the goods that you would be able to buy with the American dollar back in the 1960s versus today, you can see that the value of the dollar has dropped. Now I'm going to be doing another show on Access Humboldt in the near future on the Federal Reserve, because I think a lot of people are completely and absolutely ignorant. Now, I don't mean to be insulting when I say that the vast majority of people are ignorant. In some cases, I'm very ignorant of certain subjects. You know, for example, auto mechanics. I couldn't fix a car to save my life. I'm ignorant in regards to that, and that's fine. I accept it. I understand it. I know this. I accept the consequences of that ignorance. But a big part of the problem we have in our society today, and I see it when I go into places, you know, any place in Arcata, or if I go onto campus, or if I go, you know, into any of these places where these people, they sit there and they go, oh, we're so wise and worldly and enlightened. We're so enlightened. And then you ask them about the Federal Reserve, and they're like, huh? You ask them about Barack Obama's, you know, foreign policy, and they go, huh? You know, but you mentioned George Bush, and the first thing they do is, war criminal, war criminal, war criminal. But then you ask, well, why is he a war criminal? And they go, huh? Basically, all they do is spew political talking points. They don't know any actual facts, because once they start to look at the facts, they become educated and they become truly knowledgeable. Of course, I can also talk a little bit about what the government has done to the educational system here. Look at a typical test for an 8th grader back in the 1800s compared to look at a typical test for an 8th grader nowadays. You will see how much they've dumbed us down as a people. Now, we can also pull in spirituality and religion into that context, because people will sit there and say, oh, the original sin was, you know, nakedness. No, that was not the original sin. The original sin was when, you know, when little creation, when Adam and Eve sat there and looked up at God and said, okay, we're going to question you because something doesn't add up. And that's what they always do. That's what the government does. That's what the elite does. The government screams, how dare you question me? And that is the original sin. That's why nobody wants to be questioned. That's why we have all these religions, all these political systems in which if you dare to question the people in power, the hammer comes down.
Well, if you look up here, this painting right behind you,
yep.
You might recognize the gentleman on your right. You mentioned him earlier.
Yes.
One Mr. David Rockefeller.
Mm-hmm. Competition is a sin. Knowledge is a sin. And the way you defeat the elitists, the way you take back control of your own life, the way you come to terms with your own true nature and true power is by knowledge. And I will be doing more shows on these subjects on Access Humboldt, Channel 12. I believe Tuesdays at 8 o'clock and Saturdays at 8 o'clock. Yeah, that's PM, not AM.
So then, getting back to what you're trying to do with your show, I noticed the motto on your website, Thinking for a Change.
Yes.
Do you think there's currently on mainstream television just a general sea of thoughtlessness and schlock and fluff?
I think that a lot of it's distraction, and I mean, I'll admit there are some shows that I like to watch on, internet television, Hulu.com. It's good to be able to escape once in a while. The problem is when escape becomes a lifestyle, when it becomes a lifestyle choice. And that, unfortunately, is our entire culture is based on escapism. If you read Objectivism, Ayn Rand talks about how, your purpose in your life should be your own happiness, but at the same time, it's not meant to, true happiness is not being able to escape from whatever difficulty. True happiness is being able to face the challenges, overcome the challenges, and take the challenges on. Some of the happiest times in my life have been when I'm standing there in front of some, politically dangerous individual and basically confronting them on their BS. I've done it to Congressman Mike Thompson. I've gotten into a couple of heated conversations with him. I've gotten into a couple of heated conversations with the Arcata police. Some of those guys, I've gotten into conversations with them. And a lot of it is when I'm expressing my true nature of who I am as a man of character and liberty. Those are the happiest times in my life. If I'm try to run off and escape into some TV show or some book or some, ridiculous Hollywood-created mythology, that's not doing me or anybody else any good whatsoever.
So it sounds like, thinking back to studying psychology, Abraham Maslow, the hierarchy of needs, you're saying instead of nihilism or escapism, you want actualization, the fullest expression of one's individual sense of self.
Yeah, and of course one has to keep, one should keep a positive outlook on life. The problem is people tend to not be, what's the word I'm looking for? You have to be realistic to a certain degree. You have to know what you're capable of and what you're not capable of. Far too many people don't know what they're capable of because they're afraid to try. And of course, they're taught that they're supposed to be afraid to try. They're taught to worship athletes and celebrities and all these other people, and they're taught not to just, they're taught to basically just sit back and let all these important people do all this stuff. Well, the thing of it is those so-called important people aren't really doing anything that important. Anybody can throw a basketball through a hoop or throw a football. That's not really important. Standing up for your rights and getting fluoride out of your water, or making sure that you have a stockpile of seeds so you can grow your own food, knowing how to hunt and fish and defend your own life and defend your family's life, and knowing how to purchase property and use that property wisely. Those are what's important. Those are things that are going to carry on, not just through your life, but through generations. You should take joy in educating yourself. You should take joy in educating others. Whereas we have a culture today where it's just, nothing matters, do whatever you want, do whatever, escapist thing gives you a little bit of joy and then move on to the next thing. That's one of the biggest problems in our society. As I've said, we have a lot of, for example, homeless people who are drug addicts, and a lot of that is escapism. But see, here's the clincher, and I've noticed this when I'm on the Arcata Plaza sometimes, where I'll see a homeless person who's doing the drugs, selling the drugs, drinking the beer, etc., within 10 feet of a cop. Cop does not even care. Cop will watch them, does not care. They don't do anything. But they see somebody recycling cans, the cops are on them like, white on rice, and they're like, "Argh!" And you say, well, why is that? Well, because the person who's recycling is trying to become self-sufficient. They're trying to survive through their own effort, which is a big no-no in the world of this society as it relates into this necessity that the elites have for domination and control. They don't care if you live or die. They just want to be in control. And if you're showing them that you don't need them, you don't need their handouts, that you don't, if you show them that you're self-governing, that's a threat to them. Because if you show by example that you're self-governing, more people are going to be self-governing. It's like when I talk about character, when I talk about action, when I talk about ability. That's one of the things that that's really inspired me about Ayn Rand and objectivism. Is she talks about how, in order to be productive, it means taking action. Now you can work at a job 40 hours a week, but if you're just doing one mindless repetition activity after the other, that's not really being productive. Being productive is improving your own life to such a degree that you're expressing who you are. You're expressing the full and complete nature of your mind. Because in objectivism, there is no split between mind and body. There's no split between mind and spirit. Now, when she calls spirit, it's more consciousness, not so much necessarily the soul. But with our society of escapism today, we have this split of mind and body where people are told, don't trust your mind, trust the government, pay attention to what Justin Bieber is doing, pay attention to what some athlete's doing, don't pay attention to what the government's doing. It's like the government desires to be the parent, but of course they're the neglectful parent, they're the abusive parent. There's an incredible satisfaction when you don't need your parent. There's an incredible satisfaction when you don't need your government. And that is the true price of freedom and liberty, is being vigilant enough to control your own life, to be sovereign, and then when the government comes upon you, say, no, I'm sorry, I don't need you, and I'm going to stand up against you if you try to control my life.
Well, our glorious 44th president was just saying last week, going to fill out my NCAA brackets for March Madness, and what a pleasant diversion that is. While the radiation cloud, Xenon 133, is flowing across our continent, radiation levels being heightened in detectors across the West Coast, but that's not a problem.
The last true president of any kind, and I mean, all presidents have done things that are good, all presidents have done things that are bad, but they're corporate, figureheads. Like I said earlier, they're Ronald McDonald, they're the Geico lizard, they're the Michelin man. They're just this, they're this, shiny, happy spokesperson that they want to, Obama is the shiny, happy face for the corporation that is America. We are a corporation. We're not a country anymore. We are a corporation. That's the reality of it. Now, I know I'm going to get called a racist for saying this, but I think Obama is definitely leading to the degeneracy of all groups of people. I mean, look at Martin Luther King Jr.'s I Have a Dream speech, and then look at what Obama's speeches have been about. They're pretty much polar opposites. And the fact that he's attacking Libya for no other reason than to basically take oil, and then, I mean, he's basically nothing but, I mean, and this, we as Americans have become nothing more than the police force for the UN, for the globalists. We basically have become their lapdog. And this is truly tragic, because we were once a great country. We can be again, but it's going to take a lot of people, a lot of people disregarding the escapist drugs of sports, of alcohol, of porn, of all this other stuff. Not that all that stuff is horribly bad. Some of the, it's good to smoke a joint once in a while. It's good to have a beer once in a while. But the thing of it is you don't use those to replace reality. You don't use those to replace real life.
Now, I couldn't help but notice this bombing campaign in Libya. We don't see a real outbreak of activism. Where are the mass protests like we saw the millions of people churning out across America, across the Western world, to object to Bush's invasion of Iraq even before the invasion began?
Well, number one, you've got to consider that the issue of racism. The corporate media has created an atmosphere whenever somebody criticizes Obama, it's about racism. So you're immediately, the issue of character doesn't even come up. It becomes one of about race. And I mean, that is disturbing from a psychological perspective, because you have two presidents who basically are doing the exact same thing, Bush and Obama. And yet one was, called the rich white oil man, right? Which he was. But then at the same time, Obama's he's a millionaire, but nobody wants to talk about that. He was a corporate organizer, or a community organizer, but he also had ties to corporations. Nobody wants to talk about that. It's like they're so afraid of being called racist that they don't want to stand up and point out his flaws. Again, it's disregarding character. It's disregarding substance over style. People are more concerned with his skin color than they are with his behavior. I'm looking at, I've read a news report today about, Gaddafi. Well, I don't like Gaddafi. He's a dictator. He's a jerk. But at the same time, he's just trying to basically run his nation in a sovereign way, and he's got Obama attacking him. Now, if you look at the nations that are not under IMF control, if you look at the nations that are not under the control of the globalist bankers, they're always countries that we're going to war with. Iraq was one, Syria is one, Iran is one, North Korea is one, Libya is one. Afghanistan was also one. And I mean, we've been there for, 5 years now, going on more? It's, it's this perpetual war which distracts people away from the economy. It's this perpetual war that drums up nationalism. There's a really great book that was written in the 1930s by Wilhelm Reich called Listen, Little Man. And it basically lays out the psychological, what's the word I'm looking for? It basically lays out the psychological disease that most people are afflicted with, and what can be done about it. And I'll probably be doing a show on that book on Access Humboldt in the near future, just because we don't really read that much in our country anymore. We don't pay attention. We're such a 30-second soundbite culture that most people don't even know what's going on. They're looking for, most people are drifting from the next pleasure. They don't even have time to enjoy the pleasure of the moment. They're thinking about the next pleasure 30 seconds down the road. They're smoking a joint, and then they're not even cognizant of the fact that they're smoking a joint, because they're worried about the beer that they're going to have an hour later with their friends. And then when they're having the beer with their friends an hour later, they're not even paying attention to that. They're thinking about, that night they're going to go home with a girl or with a guy that they're going to, have fun with that night. They're not thinking, even then, it's like there's nobody's in the moment of reality. They're focused on all these distractions. It's just this attitude of how can I escape, how can I escape, how can I escape, how can I escape? Because, of course, society engenders a sense of hopelessness. It's this attitude of why bother? And in order to escape the depression and the hopelessness, which we have a lot of here in Arcata and Eureka, they just continue to seek that escape. My goal is to get people to be courageous enough to take action, disregard the escapism and focus on the problem. Because when you focus on the problem, you can deal with the problem. I'll point to the DMV, for example. If everybody in the DMV at any time, you go into the DMV at any time, any day of the week, you see so many people there that if all those people just decided to say, no, we're not paying these licensing fees, no, we're not paying insurance, no, we're not going to be extorted by the government in regards to our right to drive. If you had all those people standing up for themselves, there's not enough cops in the area to arrest all those people. There would not be, the bureaucrats would not be able to function. And if you had not just people doing that in Humboldt County, but across the entire state, there's not enough cops in the country to deal with all those people. But see, the people just sit there, they see everybody else following behind, just following like dominoes. And, if you're the rare person who stands up and says this is wrong, you're beaten down, not necessarily by the people at the top, but you're beaten down by your fellow slaves, because your fellow slaves, your fellow free-range livestock, are so afraid of the farmers, of the bankers, of the globalists, that they're so worried about escape that they don't want to pay attention to reality because they're terrified of getting hurt. But in reality, sometimes life is about pain. I mean, the founding fathers did not create America by saying, oh, we might get hurt. I mean, that's absolutely ridiculous. I will be doing another show also on police brutality. We have a lot more of that in this country than people want to talk about. I try to talk vocally about it to people, and most people are pretty scared to say anything negative about police. And I've talked to some of the local police here. Chief Nielsen, like you mentioned earlier, he basically, he knows a lot of the laws that he enforces are BS. He's stated that to me, But, and a lot of cops have admitted that a lot of the laws that they enforce are BS. But also, you have to keep in mind that when the legislators create those laws, they're doing it for the fact of special interest. Because if I'm a legislator and if I own a business and I want my competition to stop making money, all I do is write a law. I figure out what law can I write that's going to make my competitors suffer so that they can't compete, because competition is a sin. And if my competitor can't compete, they go out of business.
So that earlier point you're making about the mass resistance, I was almost hearing echoes of Solzhenitsyn. Only 10% of the people the NKVD were rounding up during the Stalinist purge had resisted with pieces of wood and bats and whatever they had available. There would have been too much resistance for the secret police and the state terror to have overcome the people and have murdered millions of people as Stalin did.
Well, and this is how the French Revolution started, and this is how the American Revolution started, because you have enough people who have enough of the resources fighting back. And there is very much a truth that the less money a group has to revolt with, you're never going to see the homeless revolt because they're suffering, they don't have anything, etc. There's not enough of them to form a real true resistance because they don't have any power. However, you get a bunch of these middle-class people who, were making 60, 70,000 a year, and all of a sudden they're being dropped down to having to work at a McDonald's. You get enough of those people around, they're going to be able to make some changes because they've still got enough connections and whatnot. It's just like some of these politicians and even some of these lawyers who want to get into the business. You see a lot of these lawyers, and I've talked to quite a few of them who, they'll tell me that they'll say the legal system is no longer about justice. It's about laws. It's just about enforcing the laws and taking money. There is no justice in the legal system. And frankly, I'm saddened that I'm one of the few voices who's actually a real activist on a lot of these subjects. We live in a country where we have free speech. Anybody could go out in front of the courthouse with a cardboard sign with something written on it like, smash the bankers, or, car insurance is fraud, or, get rid of the fluoride. Any of these issues, any big issue, they could stand in the corner, right by 101, and they could have a megaphone with them, and they could be shouting slogans, and it's perfectly legal to do so. Yet, there's nobody out there doing it. I feel like it's just me and my TV show and a few other activists who are doing what they can, but there's so much work to be done. But at the same time, you have all these, slacktivists, which I call them. They're slackers more than activists, like Verbena or some of these other people. David Kopp, he would call himself an activist, but we all know that he's just another another shiny, happy face out for his own little agenda. He doesn't really care about a big issue. He doesn't really care if some politician bought him off. He'd happily take the money and go crawl off into the the whatever and not be heard from again. I mean, that's the reality of it. A lot of these people do get bought off. A lot of these people get scared off. And the fact that I alone am one of the few who have the balls to stand up and speak the truth, that shows me that, I have a lot more power than I realize, and I need to change my strategy to help make it easier for any of, the viewers who want to get involved, but who might not feel that they have the knowledge to do so, or they may just be afraid to do so.
One of Glenn Beck's favorite targets, Saul Alinsky, who rules for radicals, he made a similar argument that it's the have a little, want mores, the middle class. Mm-hmm. That's going to be the origin point of any successful revolution.
Yeah.
But just to be clear, you're not calling for a violent revolution, a violent overthrow.
No. You've seen this in, how should I say this? There's a difference between being assertive and being violent. If you have, 30 people go up to, I'll use Councilwoman Stillman, Alex Stillman in Arcata, right? She was for a long time very hateful about the homeless, very ignorant about the homeless, and pretty soon she had people like John Shelter and other homeless advocates just continuously, en masse, basically walk up to her and say, hey, Councilwoman Stillman, we want to discuss this issue with you. Very rational, very calm, very much had all their stuff together as far as what bullet points and what issues needed to be addressed immediately. Now she's basically on the side of the homeless in a lot of ways. And she's also kind of frustrated that the system is the way it is, because there's still a lot of people in the system who profit from the degradation of other human beings, for the reasons of control and power. A lot of it's not even about money, it's about control. But do that with any person who's in power. Just walk up to them, understand that they're not Darth Vader. There's very few people who are truly evil, very few. But at the same time, have the balls to walk up and be respectful, but definitely be assertive. There's a story in one of the religious texts that I've read during my time getting a bachelor's degree in religious studies at HSU. There's a story about how this woman was in poverty, and she needed a judge to basically do something so that she could start a business or something. She basically every day she went to the judge's house and she kept on with it, talking. Pretty soon the guy just said, oh, whatever, just give this woman what she wants so she leaves me alone. And that's what we need to do. We need to bother these people. We need to make their life difficult in the sense that they don't get a moment's rest. They don't get a moment's rest, so that even when they're sleeping, the voices of the activists, the voices of the people are constantly in their minds saying, hey, show some character.
So you mentioned the short attention span syndrome infecting our society. You're trying to get on television, but you're dealing with a television watching culture where it's the clicker, the remote control mentality.
Yeah.
They're flipping from channel 3 up the dial. They're going past 12. They find your show. What do you think you're doing with your program that's capturing their interest enough to make them want to watch an hour-long show where it's a lot of talking, it's a lot of discussion, it's not a lot of flashy graphics?
Well, and I've thought about that. And I mean, we also, Access Humboldt also has Internet Archive, so if people want to download my shows, which they do frequently, we have a potential of 40,000 here just in the area of what Access Humboldt is able to reach. Now, one of the things that I'm going to be doing with my show is I'm going to be becoming a lot more controversial. I was hearing Alex Jones talk about this kind of a thing earlier in the week where he knows the elites won't touch him because he's so out there. He's so open. He's so bold. He's so, he's shouting at the top of his lungs. And every time they come after him, all he does is say, hey, this agency, these people, they're doing it again. And people know, oh, we can't attack Alex Jones because he's a public figure. And that's kind of what I'm going to have to start doing. It's the left-right paradigm to give the viewers, to simplify so that the viewers can really get a good grasp of it. It's like when you have a little kid and you want the little kid to put on a sweater because it's cold outside. So you tell the child, okay, you have a choice between the red sweater or the blue sweater. Which sweater do you want? The issue never comes up of, why do I need a sweater? The child never says, well, maybe I'm not going to wear a sweater. Maybe I want to wear a coat instead. Maybe I want to wear a long-sleeve shirt, no sweater at all. But they trick people into thinking that you either have this choice or this choice. Those are the only ones. Those are absolutes. And when you go beyond that, then you truly become a threat to the dominant paradigm. Alex Jones, he's been doing it for decades, constantly speaking out the same thing. Some people call him a broken record, but he's constantly doing it, and he's constantly gaining viewers and listeners. A lot of people get frustrated because they think, I'll go out on the street corner, I'll be an activist for a few days, and things will change. No, you got to understand that a lot of these things a lot of these problems we have in society have taken such a long time to form. It's going to take a hell of a long time to basically, they're going to take a heck of a long time to basically be solved. You have simple solutions to difficult problems. Let's look at the problem of homelessness. What do the homeless need? Most likely homes. Well, wait a minute. Why not just give them homes, affordable housing? Well, because there's corporate interests, governmental interests who don't want them to have homes because it's an issue of control. It's never about money. It's always about control. Money, drugs, sex, booze, power, any of that stuff. It's all just tools of control.
Now, last question. You have taken on the local media establishments, radio, newspapers, and so forth. What gives you hope of ultimate success given their market power versus the relatively small platform that you built for yourself?
Well, I think in regards to, first of all, I think we need to clarify the question because we have to recognize that in order to deal with somebody like a state-sponsored newspaper like the Arcata Eye, you have to realize that a solution to that problem is going to be different from solving a problem such as, some nutball working at K-Slug, or, an issue of, some newspaper owner having, taking bribes from a corporation or something, or some, you have all these different aspects. You have there's no one magic pill. If there is a magic pill, it's just speaking the truth consistently, and then having all your points, laid out so you can clarify. There's times that I've spoken about subjects and I've been incredibly clear. I've laid out the bullet points, but the person I'm speaking to just doesn't get it. And I can't get frustrated. I just have to accept it, and I have to move on to the next person. You're not going to change a lot of people's minds. That's just the way it is. But, it's like with sales. You only need one sale to get the money. You only need one sale. It's like if you're working commission or something. You just need that one sale. You're going to talk to 10 people. You might only make one sale. It's just like when you're trying to date somebody. You might be dating 10, 15, 20 women before you find the one that you actually want to date consistently. It's a matter of playing the numbers, knowing that you're going to have to put a lot of product out. You got to be consistent. You have to have character, and then when you put enough of that stuff out, eventually people are going to basically come to hear more of what you have to say. Because I've met people who have never heard of the Federal Reserve. I've met people who don't have a clue as to what the fair tax is, which I'm also going to do an episode on that. I've talked to people who know what's going on, but they're absolutely terrified to tell anybody else that they know what's going on because they're afraid of the repercussions. I mean, there's people who are working in government right now, including Arcata city government, who they know the truth, they know what's going on, they know how corrupt Kevin Hoover is, for example, but they're not going to say anything bad about him because they don't want to get slimed in his paper. It's just a matter of being consistent and having a good message.
But point is, no matter what happens to Access or to me, you have the Nick Bravo Show. It's on YouTube, and it's going to keep going pretty much hell or high water.
Yes. I've gotten to the point where I realize I am, in many ways, according to the bankers, according to the globalists, according to a lot of the people here even, I am persona non grata. There are people who, I am certain if they could, come up behind me in a dark alley and, finish me off, they probably would. Not everybody is a nice, peaceful, enlightened individual. There's various things that I want to do to make my show bigger. And it's not to make myself rich, it's to spread the message. Because I see so many people who are just, they're escaping into drugs and porn and booze and to silly ideologies because they don't know how to deal with reality. Ayn Rand talks about in The Virtue of Selfishness how people they abandon their mind because they start to see the universe as incomprehensible. Well, that's how they're going to see the world if they don't have people who are honestly telling them what they want to hear. So stay tuned for my show on accesshumboldt.net and keep informed.
Nicholas Bravo, independent television producer and philosophical iconoclast, thanks for being our last-minute substitute guest here on Sentinel Interviews.
You're welcome.